Well, our task today is Agnes's green meeting. Any questions, comments before we just launch into that?
I have two comments. One is someone's coming to my house around 1 to fix some stuff. So I will have to go then, or whenever he comes. He may, if he's late, I can stay longer. And then my
So
second comment is I just saw that there was an email from you about the meeting, but I haven't read it. So if there's something essential there, then
what I did was I sent you a copy of the document that I'm about to open on my screen on the
okay,
possibility that you would like to have that open. But it's the same document that you've already had, which was called Agnes
talk to him.
Contemporary
Contemporary
description.
Descriptions, right?
I have it on
So
my screen. Yeah.
if so you don't have to be looking at exactly the same place in the document that I've got open on my screen.
Are you going to share your screen or should
I
I open it on
I
my
am
screen?
gonna share my screen.
Okay, then I'm not going to open it on my screen. I'll just look at yours.
Okay. Then, unless anybody's got anything else to say, and as far as the 1 o'clock is concerned, that'll be 2 hours from now. I'm guessing we'll be shot by then. So it's
I
Yeah,
have to
that's
leave. I also have to leave at 1 anyway. So
okay.
so let me share my screen. And so you should be able to see the document that y'all can see that,
Yep.
which is exactly the same document as before. The only difference is that to prepare for the green meeting, what I do is I put this little row of green dots in here, which means that if I type anywhere in the middle of it, it turns out to be green. Just saves the, but it makes it a little bit easier for me to do the typing here. So our task is to go through these samples and bring them to mind, so to speak, and see whether we have a joint recollection of what this what this sample is, or not necessarily a joint recollection, but a recollection of what this sample entails. And then we'll write a caption, and then we'll move on to the next sample, and then we'll move through all of Agnes's samples, and we'll start from the last day, because presumably that's where we understood the best about what Agnes's samples were.
and are we going to take them on that day from? I'm asking because I've got the transcripts open as well. I want to know where to start. Are we starting from the end of the day or the beginning of the
I
day?
think it's generally easier to start from the beginning of the day. Start from the beginning of the day, but of the last day,
Got it.
just because it's easier to go forwards in a transcript than it is to go backwards in a transcript.
Yes, I guess. I said
So
I said yes, but I don't know why it's easier to go forwards than backwards. But
yeah, it just turns out to be slightly
okay.
easier.
Read forwards. That's why, Michael, unless you're reading
Yeah,
backwards, which it wouldn't surprise me.
that's right. So we're going to look at the first sample here, and then write a caption about it.
And so can you briefly tell me? I probably should already know this, but I'm afraid I don't. Can you tell me what the relationship is between what's in the contemporary description for 7.5 and what's in the transcript? Are these basically quotations from the transcript, or is this something?
So the contemporary descriptions are versions are my descriptions of the sample.
Right.
And I guess I should say in classical DES, if we were doing a real DES study, then the contemporary description would be something that one of us would write and then pass back and forth between all the other interviewers who were involved, and make those descriptions as good as possible every on right immediately within a day, within a 24 hours basically after every sample. We didn't do that necessarily. I sent you every day the contemporary descriptions, but we never applied ourselves really to making sure that they
Right. I guess that's why yeah, so that's probably why I'm not so familiar with these. I mean, I'm looking at the transcript and it looks like it's sort of semi-quotation like, but not, but selective.
When I write a transcript, I very often start with what in this case Agnes's first salvo would be,
Hmm.
and because it just saves me a little bit of time. But then I clean that up and by clean that up, I mean I I try to improve it based on the rest of the discussion that we had.
Right. Okay. No, I that's becoming clear as I'm comparing these things. Yes.
Okay. But the point of that of all of this is that it's never that we take Agnes's words as the gospel describing Agnes's description. We give Agnes credit for being a careful but fallible describer, and we give each of us credit. So I feel I myself have a capable but fallible memory, and my writing skills are all everybody is a fallible contributor. So what I would say for the green description here, the caption description is that there's inner speaking,
Mhm.
and that there is some kind of a cognitive pause or something. Uh, we'll just call it a pause, not a cognitive pause. And there's a seeing without or with a weak figure ground phenomenon.
So is it, I mean, so I'm looking now just at your description and maybe I'll go back to the transcript, but it says at the same time I see the computer screen without any particular focus. So why are we saying that's a weak figure ground as opposed to just there's no focus at all?
I mean, one of the distinctions that we had made is, well, actually, I don't know if this is exactly how we talked about it, but um, having a figure ground phenomenon within the screen. So, for example, when there's a sentence that I'm looking at, that may have been the next one or something like that, and that is the figure, and then the rest of the screen is the ground, as opposed to there being no figure ground phenomenon within the screen. Nevertheless, the screen and the contents of the screen itself are the figure, and the ground is everything else around the screen. So I don't know if partial figure ground, yeah, so I don't know how that distinction connects to weak or partial figure ground in this case.
So my recollection is that that is the distinction that we were trying to make here. But it's
Uh-huh.
also possible that the green would be better with no or weak or partial figure ground. And then, so let's think about what the point of the green description is. So the object of the green thing is to help us stay on track when it comes time to write a characterization of Agnes's experience.
Mhm.
And so we are going to run a write because we spent a lot of time talking about figure ground phenomenon in Agnes's experience. And what this green thing is going to say here is this is a sample that we ought to be thinking about when we're interested in figure ground phenomenon. So we don't have to go back and read all the transcript or watch all the video or read all the description. This will be assigned to us. This is one that we should consider when we're going to write about Agnes's figure ground phenomenon.
Mhm.
And by putting this in here right now, I would say, well, maybe there was some figure ground in that Agnes had zeroed in to some degree on the screen and not what the window or the wall or whatever
Right.
that's behind the screen.
I see that now. I was, yeah, I was misreading the without any particular focus earlier, and but that was without any particular focus relative to the boundaries of the screen or something like that.
Right. And 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 I would say this is the conversation that we're having right now is exactly what the point of the green meeting is. The green meeting is to reawaken those conversations so that when we write about them, we can do as good a job of writing about them as we can.
So Russ, in that case, I mean, just I don't know if weak or partial figure ground phenomenon is quite right. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it
because
seems to me, sorry, doesn't it seem like there's just it's just it's regular figure ground and then, but the figure is the screen as a whole rather than anything on it?
yeah, that's more or less what I was gonna say.
So go ahead and say what you were going to say.
So I was gonna say that it doesn't seem okay, like imagine to me something like weak or partial figure ground phenomenon refers to the extent to which the figure is contrasted with the ground, where strong figure ground phenomenon is like there is a clear and distinct figure that is clearly and distinctly distinct from the ground, or something like that. And then weak would be like it's maybe less distinct or something like that. Whereas what I was going to say and what Michael just said is that um, in my recollection in the sample, it's not that it was particularly strong or weak. It's just that the screen plus contents of screen was the figure, everything else was the ground, rather than some particular sentence being the figure and everything else in the screen being the ground.
I mean, but okay, so I'm going to offer now from the transcript a slight a retraction of what Agnes and I just said.
That'll
Um,
save me. That'll save me the effort.
um, because I'm looking now in the transcript and I see 1322. Um, I'm not focused on anything in this moment. It's kind of like this pause kind of moment where there isn't anything I'm focusing on, but I am seeing the screen.
Hmm.
So my recollection of this sample is that the distinction that is hard for us to be making in general and in general with Agnes, I guess, would be, and when applied to this sample, is between my eyeballs are aimed at and what my experience is. So the question is whether that sentence that Michael just wrote translates as my eyeballs are aimed at the screen and I'm taken in. So my eyeballs are aimed at the screen. The question is whether I have made anything figural or whether I have to some degree started to make a figure and I've sort of zeroed in on the screen aspect of it, but not yet really.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of being inclined now back towards the kind of partial. Not, I think no would be too strong, but
Yeah, no,
partial.
I kind of agree now too. Like now that you've said that, Michael, I mean that's helpful. And yeah, I'm kind of inclined to go with that as well.
Because I would
The rest,
interpret
you're right.
because that seems like a reasonable interpretation of I am seeing the screen, as the screen is still a thing that's somehow distinct from all the other stuff, but you're definitely not figurizing anything on the screen.
Yes. And also I retract what I said earlier about the screen being the figure and everything else being the ground, now that you read that quote from me.
So that is why we have to do these conversations so that we can retract or revise or whatever. And that so so does weak or partial seem good, or is there now?
I I mean, it seems to match with the what we said about that in the transcript.
And I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
And now that, Michael, now that you read the transcript, it's funny because I was like, I'm the authority of my experience, let me tell you. But now that you read it, you helped jog my memory to the experience
I mean,
itself.
I was reading your words.
I know you were. But that's why I think it's funny because I thought that my memory was kind of better than my words, but I think that was false.
You know what, just as a side note, and I know we have a lot to do, so I won't do this very often, but I've written a very, very small amount about my own experience, and I may end up having to talk about it in a few weeks at a conference, not one that you're going to be at, Agnes. And I found a similar thing, right? When I go back and read my own words, sometimes that revises my own memory of what was going on. But also vice versa, because sometimes in retrospect, especially in light of the whole process, I can look at my words and realize that I was sort of confused in the moment and I'm a little bit clearer now.
Then the conversation that we're having now is in the ballpark of what I would call it's not about the words. Words are rubbery kinds of things, and so the words that we started out with today, and then 5 minutes later revised because the words are in a different context. Those words are not the same words. Those are and that's just the way it is, I think, and I think that's the way sort of all words are. And DES is one way, maybe the best way, or the best way I know that, to make that clear, make that point clearly.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, if I can make one incidental comment as well, and I'll also restrain myself, but I was thinking about that this morning because I had like a series of very weird dreams and I just remembered them. And I was writing about them just purely for my own self because they were so weird. And I realized that even in writing the words to only myself, I couldn't quite find the words to refer to the experiences. And the words that I chose would kind of change them in, sorry, the dreams, not the experiences, but change them in subtle ways. So anyway, yes, I'm seeing this. It's not about the words thing.
So when we write the description of Agnes's figure ground phenomenon, the description that we write is going to be yet in a yet a different context,
Right.
and that description is going to be not it's going to be unfaithful to Agnes's actual figure ground phenomenon in the same way that she just described that her description of her dreams are unfaithful. That's just the way it is. But they're going to be in the ballpark. What we want to do is to keep our description of Agnes's figure ground phenomenon in the ballpark of the way it was. We're not going to quibble about whether it's a 100% accurate or 97% accurate or something, but we want it to be better than 50 or better than 20 or something. And that's the process that we're going through here. And also, I would say that the discussion that we're having now, or yeah, now is good enough, is in the ballpark of the little or no discussion, which I think we have had. In my take, we can't really distinguish between little or no. That's just not possible. And so I think the amount of figure ground phenomenon that Agnes has here is in the little or no category. There's
Hmm. Yeah, agreed.
and all we're really going to do at the end is to say there's no crisp figure ground here. She's not zeroed in on this particular line on the computer screen or whatever like she is in a later beep. It's not figure ground like that. It's a more diffuse, maybe diffuse figure ground would be better than weak or partial.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm happy with any of this.
Okay. Onward to the last sentence here, which in my lingo would be sensory awareness bodily. or tactile. Those words blur into each other for me. And
Yeah, that's fine by me, I think.
so we happy for this caption? The object of the caption being when we have gone through all the samples, then we can, if we're trying to remember what we're going to write about, this is going to be a clue for us to get there.
So I'd like to raise, and this is a kind of Russ. I foresee what we're doing at this very first one as a little bit like in miniature what you like to call iterative, in the sense that we're probably spending a lot more time on this one than we'll need to on some of the later ones as we get faster at this. Because that's what I'm telling myself right now. Otherwise, this is going to take 6 hours.
But we'll find out about that. I think in general that's correct. But and I think with Agnes, my prediction is it is going to be correct because I think the figure ground phenomenon was the difficult thing for Agnes, and so when we get done hashing that out, then things after that will be easier.
Right. But I want to raise another, I think there's another phenomenon here that I remember, I could be wrong, but I think I remember coming up several times, and I'm not sure we ever totally focused on it, but it's the pause. It seems to me that there were several times when Agnes described a kind of I was pausing, I was anticipating the next thought, or I was wondering how I was going to answer this objection, but not wondering in any very focused, explicit way. And so I'm wondering whether something along the lines of pause in thought or suspended thought, or those aren't quite the right words. But in your description, Russ, I'm looking at while in a kind of pause, waiting for the rest of the sentence to appear. And to whatever, if that's not a what was happening in the world description, but she was experiencing herself as paused or something like that. And I know there's a lot of baggage around experiencing herself. I didn't mean to imply any kind of meta experience or anything like that, but just experiencing the pausiness of the thought or something. I feel like that came up several times, and it might be worth at least provisionally flagging here in case we do see it coming up several times.
Well, we did flag it at least to this extent.
Oh, I sorry, I got so many windows up on my screen, I didn't quite see that part. But maybe,
But I think you're right in bringing our attention to that, and it could be that we should massage this description and put this in brackets.
I guess now that I'm seeing the word pause in the green description, maybe just adding what was paused. I mean, so it wasn't, for example, you could read that pause as a pause in inner speaking, but that's not what it was. It was a pause in thought, and it was a pause in a previously active thought about writing.
I mean, I think one small refinement would be to just say pausing in blah blah blah, or like, I mean, rather than just pausing and then specifying further, at least a little bit, the nature of the pause.
So I'll read again what you said, Agnes,
Okay.
which might give us a clue about how to do that. So
Uh-huh.
at 10:35, I was in like a pause moment of trying to figure out what precisely I want to say in response to the objection. So this pause in the midst of a thought about what to do next or what to say next, I think that comes up more than once.
Yes.
And so I wonder if we can characterize the nature of that pause very briefly, like a pause in thought or a pause in active thought, or I'm not sure what the right words are to use.
So sorry, it's still early in the morning for me.
Yeah.
The The question for me is how much of the pause is experience. So there's a pause, and we can, and I'm happy to say that in some general sense, she's writing a paper. She's not at this moment writing the paper, and therefore it is true that she is waiting for the next sentence in this paper to appear. That is true. But whether that's experientially true is another deal altogether, I think. So the pause could be caused by the fact that she's hungry and her hunger interests have not become conscious but have distracted her from the writing.
I I mean, I want to push back against that because I think in all of the samples where I paused, it wasn't like a distracted pause. It was a pause. I would characterize what I was doing still as writing. I mean, for me, writing involves many different activities, and one of them is this kind of pause within the writing process. So I would not, I mean, I would distinguish this kind of pause from a distracted sort of pause that would constitute a break in the writing. Um, it was a pause in the sense that, I mean, I know we're not talking about previous samples now, but I'm going to bring them in a little bit because I think they're relevant and similar. Um, it's kind of like a pause where I'm thinking or listening or kind of anticipating what's coming next in the process of writing. That's part of the writing process. So, um, yeah, I don't know how to kind of summarize that, but I think that's important that it's not a distraction. It's not separate from the writing process, but a constitutive part of the writing process.
So does that capture it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that does capture it. Yeah, I think so.
I was thinking of an analogy to hear hearing a pause in thought similar to a pause in sound. So I'm hearing silence in some sense, but there's some kinds of hearing silence where it's surrounded by sound, and so there's some sense in which the sound just stopped, and that's kind of it's kind of coloring my experience. And I'm sort of anticipating that there will be more sound later, as opposed to just not hearing anything, which is a very different kind of experience where like sound just wasn't part of your experience at all. But in some contexts, silence is part of your experience, and
I agree.
this seems like a similar thing, except it's not about sound; it's about thinking.
Mm,
I agree with all of that.
me too.
So from the standpoint of what the green meeting is about and what the caption is about is what we're trying to do is to organize our thinking about Agnes's experience. And and now what we're talking about is we are going to be interested in saying there's quite a few pauses in Agnes's thinking here, and this is going to be one of them.
Do we want to say anticipatory pause of thought, just to clarify that it's not about the speaking or the seeing? I mean, that feels to me like it will remind me better of what we're talking about, but
Okay?
I,
That's fine.
it's
That's fine with me. So what I want to point out another about another installment of it's not about the words. It is and it isn't about the words, as is always the case when I say it's not about the words. What this portion of the green caption is designed to do is to help us get back to thinking about this sample when it comes time to write about Agnes's pauses. And so we want to be able to find things that we can search. That part of the green thing is we'll search in the green categories so that we can count or something. Well, how many pauses were they and where were they? The green is going to help us out in that. But that doesn't mean that we have to be slavishly, well, we said during the green meeting it was an anticipatory pause, therefore we have to use the word anticipatory or whatever.
That's how I was thinking of it.
Okay. So we happy with the green for the
I'm
anticipatory pause and also the whole green?
Hmm.
Number 6. And by the way, I don't consider the captions as set in stone. When we get to another pause sample or another uh, figure ground thing, we may want to come back and change what we wrote here.
Right. I mean, there's a sense in which, correct me if this is wrong. I mean, I should just say, like everything I say, you should just assume that it's prefaced by that statement. It seems like we're sort of creating categories here, or attempting to. Categories that are relevant, directly relevant to Agnes's specific experience.
That's correct. We are creating categories, or you might say we are reflecting categories that we've already created.
Yeah, fair.
So
Maybe a
it's
little of both.
iterative. Everything is iterative from my point of view, iterative all the way down.
So refining categories, maybe.
Yep. That is exactly correct, I think. And we could quibble about the word categories too. It's things we need to describe, but yes, that is what the green meeting is supposed to do. We're gonna when we write about Agnes's description, it's gonna be structured with paragraphs and sections or whatever, and because that's how people communicate in writing, and this is designed to help us do that. And if you call those sections categories, I don't really care about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was using the word loose. I didn't mean like the absolutely real, objective facts about Agnes's experience.
I think we are all in agreement that there is something about pauses that characterize the experiences that we collected from Agnes. That might be because that she was engaged in writing much of the time that the sampling occurred. So the pause might not be a good characteristic of her in all of her situations. But as far as the ones we got, it was a thing. Number 6. So this is a sensory awareness somewhere in the bodily tactile range.
Mhm. Oh, look, and there's another pause.
And then a
An
semicolon.
anticipatory pause of thought.
This looks very similar to the previous one, doesn't it? I mean, I guess the only slight difference, but maybe these differences aren't enough to matter, is that in this one, it seems like you wanted to say that maybe there was some lingering sense of a stronger figure ground that was dissipating or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty subtle difference that may not have to make it into these green descriptions, but it's there.
We buy that.
Yeah.
And I'll put a question mark in after dissipating.
I mean, should we distinguish between, so in brackets you have computer screen as you do above. But the thing that was dissipating was the sentence that I had been focusing on as the figure rather than the computer screen. Is that something that should be
So what you had in mind?
Should it be of sentence? Like, should that be added or not? I'm happy with that, I think.
And in answer to your previous question, should it be added or not? That's something of the art of the green. If it's something that we think we might want to think about later on, then it's better to put it into the green because we can always ignore it later.
Yeah.
What's hard is to remember, well, which sample was it that she had a figure and it was going away? That's what the question mark.
Right. That all makes sense.
We happy with 77.6?
Yep.
Yes.
So we're going to, it's 7.1 now, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I have a question.
Sorry, I was trying to find it in the transcript.
So, the sensory awareness, I mean, I've noticed that here we haven't distinguished the different kinds of sensory awareness. Is that intentional or should we do that? And I mean, one reason that comes to mind to distinguish this one from the others, although I'm not at all tied to this, is that there is like this shifting feeling here. So, I mean, does that matter? Should that be there?
That's what I was going to say. What Russ just did was my
Okay.
thought. It was what
So in the little or no, which we've had this discussion already today, but in the little or no category, whether there is figure ground phenomenon here, or whether what she is saying, what Agnes is saying, speaking of Agnes in the third person here, what Agnes is saying is more of my visual, more of my retina is occupied with the computer screen than anything else. But I haven't made an experiential focus of it at all, really. It's more central, but it's not figurized. And I think the answer to that is we probably can't make that distinction. Then it's in the little or no category. There's either no figure ground or there's a little figure ground.
I mean, the words, and I won't read them, but the words in the transcript are very similar to the first sample where she says something like, I was aware of the screen, but nothing in particular on the screen. It does seem like the description is very similar, which I'm just saying that to justify the use of the same phrase.
Okay. So the question is to say I'm seeing the screen makes it seem like that I have made the screen a figure. But I'm guessing that isn't what happened at that
Well,
Agnes experience at the moment.
well, I think that yes, I'm agreeing with that, and
Okay.
that's why I think this is similar. I mean, I think she in both cases she said something like, I'm seeing the screen, but but in neither case was there this like strong distinction being made between the screen and the rest of the stuff. But somehow the screen was, I don't know, a little more there for her than the rest of the stuff or something. I think that's why the weak or partial or diffuse makes sense.
So I think we are in the realm of we can't make this distinction between really no figure ground at all or a little bit of figure of the screen's a little bit of a figure, but not much. So we all in agreement about that?
Yep.
On to number two.
So one thing that I think might be distinctive about this one, and so maybe, I mean, I realize that one thing we're doing is sort of trying to do what I earlier characterized as making categories. But this one I recall being distinctive in the sense that Agnes seemed pretty, I think, I'm going to look at the transcript and be sure this is right. I think she was more confident about where the beep happened relative to experience in this case, more than she seemed to be in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said in the thing, the beep went off after I had typed till. That, I mean, I'm quoting now from the transcript, but I think that's also in Russ's description or pretty close to it.
Yeah.
And that strikes me as unusual rather than usual for Agnes. And maybe that's worth noticing as well.
And does this capture that for you?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if this is something worth noting now, or if this comes more from the generalization looking at all the samples. But one thing we talked about was that for some experiences, it's just easier to know when the beep interrupted them, such as saying something and then the beep comes, as opposed to kind of being in a pause where it's more inchoate.
So one of the things that Russ has said, which strikes me as plausible, was that the information that you're confident about where the beep happened relative to experience might reflect something about the experience itself. And that's why I was pointing this out. Um,
Right.
but
Right. I think that's what Agnes was saying as well. That,
okay, yeah.
and I'm in agreement with that. The fact that she had a figure and the fact that she knew when the beep came, those are not unrelated, I think. When Agnes's experience is sort of all over the place, and I want to make 100% sure that that is not understood as a criticism, because as I have said before, I think there's reason to say that that's smart or wise or skillful or something. To not always have a focus. It's dangerous not to not have a focus, but it might be good. And but those things are related. So we happy with this caption?
Yes.
So I've got to ask, is it the neighbor's cat or is it a neighborhood
No,
cat?
it's just the neighborhood cat, but the
Mm.
neighbors and I have talked both. We've all talked about like, well, we want to keep her. Should we keep her? Should she be our shared cat? But we all travel too much. We've had those conversations.
Okay, got it. So this caption conveys for me that there were two separate feelings going on. Neither one of them was experienced directly in the body. That's what mental means.
Mm.
And there was seeing without figure ground. We happy with that?
Um, I wonder. It seemed to me that the weirdo part was really more specifically a concern about whether Agnes had crossed some kind of social line.
Yeah. Although I was worried about being a weirdo too.
But well, no, but those are the same. But that's just a more specific version of being worried about being a weirdo. But the words I'm looking at the transcript, and the words you used more often were, "Am I crossing a line?"
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which sounds more specific because there's lots of ways to be weird, and this is one particular one.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I would say, just as a meta comment as to what we're doing here, is that it is evident that each of us has a different perspective on these things. In the act, Michael is tied to the transcript, which is good. Russ is more interested in the what's he going to type in the green. Agnes is remembering sort of globally, whatever. We all have a different perspective that we are trying to honor but not accept as the gold standard.
That all makes sense.
On to day 6.
Mhm.
Okay. So a distinction that um, might be relevant in this case, and I'm trying to remember the reason I'm pausing. I was trying to remember. Um, Maybe there's no answer to this question, but in this case, sure, specifically, Agnes's inner speaking was, in some sense or other, addressed to another. Um, and in 7.5, for example, it didn't seem like that was the case. She was innerly speaking something that was that was her own thought about, that she was writing. So in some sense, I guess it's addressed to another, but there was not some kind of explicitly present other, so to say, that was the addressee of such an objection.
But I
Uh,
also wouldn't say explicitly present other
so
because
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I wouldn't say explicitly. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I
didn't
wouldn't
like those words
say-
when I said them.
okay.
um,
Because the other wasn't present, even though they were addressed to you and Russ.
right. That's why I didn't like those words. But there's a kind of addressee in
Yeah,
this case that there didn't seem to be in the earlier case of inner speaking. Like
So
you didn't say something like as if to an audience member raising an objection or something like that.
I mean, I think that's true. I'm wondering whether that difference is relevant
I
here.
don't know. I have no
I'm
idea.
raising that as a genuine question because to me, from what I like, as far as my recollection of these experiences goes, I wouldn't have necessarily highlighted that as a difference that makes a difference, because ultimately they were both instances of inner speech. And um, yes, it's true. One of them was in the context of I'm writing this paper and there is no particular audience in mind. And the other one was about like me imagining myself to be saying something to you and Russ, those those contextual differences, I'm not sure they're really like part of my experience in any deep sense. I don't know.
Well, let me ask this. That all makes sense, and I certainly wouldn't know whether the distinction is important. Um, but here's something else that you said, and maybe this gets at something that's more common rather than different. You said like almost as if I'm rehearsing what I'm going to say to you. So there's this like rehearsal aspect to it, which could be common to both.
Uh-huh.
Rehearsal isn't exactly the word to use because that's also anticipatory in some sense. Whereas I didn't get the impression that 7.5 was anticipatory in any way, but it is a kind of, I, I'm not sure what the word to use is there. Saying words to yourself that you might or may not be, that you are also, I mean, here's what, this is it. You're saying words to yourself that also are words that appear in some other context. In this case, it's writing the word, it's written words, right? You have just written such an objection and now you're saying them to yourself. And in the other case, it's words that you anticipate might be spoken in the future, but you're saying them now to yourself. But so both are a kind of rehearsal, although one is kind of more backwards looking and one is more forwards looking. But what you're suggesting right now is that the backwards versus forwards looking thing may not be so important.
So let me make a comment about this. So Agnes is so Michael has suggested the potential for a category that there's this impersonal and impersonal stuff, and Agnes is saying, well, I don't think that's a category, and I would say is let's not decide that now. Let's allow that to emerge, and so let's keep that as a possibility. And so I have altered. This is the 7-point caption. I have added this phrase to the inner speaking. Does that seem like a characteristic, an adequate characteristic of this phrase? And then when we go back to the and also when I wrote this as addressed to, I did not put the object of who this was addressed to. That was a sort of in the same kind of reaction as Agnes was saying that Russ and Michael weren't there. And so I didn't put that this was to a particular person, but there was as if it was addressing to.
And I mean,
And
maybe
yeah, go ahead.
I think the addressed to and the rehearsal aspect, I think are distinct, and I think they're both relevant. I would maybe push back against what the distinction Michael was making earlier about, or rather the similarity that Michael was drawing on earlier. If I understand correctly, Michael was saying that both this case and 7.5 could be understood as instances of rehearsal. I think this one certainly can be. Like this one, I think like rehearsal is a good word, I think, to characterize this one. Whereas the other one I wouldn't really characterize as rehearsal. Like that's just not how I think of the writing and the inner speaking in that context. But I would use that word for this one. And I think that is a difference that makes a difference because perhaps because that kind of when I'm speaking, innerly speaking in that kind of rehearsal way, it's like, and I'm not saying this is all necessarily exactly part of the experience, but it's like I'm imagining myself saying these things to you, like I'm kind of imagining the conversation as opposed to inner speaking where I'm writing, which I think is a difference. And again,
So
I'm not using imagining to you like in any kind of literal way. It's just pointing out the difference between these two contexts of inner speech.
So yeah, I know I didn't like the word rehearsal either. Um,
But I said I do like it in this context.
right. No, but I didn't like it. I agree with that. In fact, yeah, you said there, you said it as if to the two of us, but then you made it very clear that we weren't in any way experientially present. So that, that, that seems, that does feel like rehearsal, like, and I was trying to think of how, in what sense this inner speaking and the previous one. So I was trying to think about similarities and differences.
Mm.
And the differences, I think we've clarified. The similarity, which may or may not be relevant, or you may not feel that this is a similarity, has something to do with, I, I hesitate to put it this way, but the re in rehearsal and the re in repetition. Like in both cases, you're saying words that somehow also exist in another context. And in one case, you're repeating words that you had written, and in one case, you're rehearsing words that you anticipate perhaps saying. So it's not a kind of ad hoc inner speaking where you're just like musing to yourself or something. You're saying
Mm.
words that also have some applicability in a separate context from the one in which you're saying them to yourself, in a writing context or in a speaking to people context. Do you see what I'm saying?
So,
Yes.
so let me state it in the way that I would have stated. I think the same thing, and I in my head used the word bridge. That these words seem to bridge something. These were one bridged what she might say to us when the thing happened,
Mm.
and the other case bridged to what she was writing about the paper. But
Yeah.
I think that's the re that Michael is referring to is the same kind of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I agree with that.
We talked about that one a long time. I mean, not just now, I mean in the transcript.
So I guess I would, given that I'm talking to a couple of philosophers here, what I would say is that what we are trying to do here is to get the words that we are thinking about using to rest lightly on Agnes's experience and not trying to make them necessarily verbally coherent. This is not about fitting a word to a theory or fitting a word to another batch of words, which is what I take philosophy to be. It's about fitting words to uh, uh, directly apprehended experience. That's sort of an amusing aside for me. On to number two.
So I'm inclined, but maybe I'm reading too much into Agnes's words, and maybe I'm now maybe this is applying a theory here. I don't mean a philosophical theory. I mean a theory about Agnes. Um, because what she says, I mean, you've summarized it, and that it matches what we said in the transcription, of course. You know, I see the list on the tablet on the table without focusing on any of those aspects. But still, in her description, she was able to say, well, we're talking about the tablet and the table here. We're not talking about, it's not that I see the list just with that, there's something there's something that's being picked out of the environment as relevant to describe here, and that's the table. And it feels a little bit like the same thing as saying, well, I'm seeing the computer screen, but I'm not seeing anything particular on it. But the computer screen was still the thing that was being picked out as sort of the thing that I was not seeing anything on, which is why we've been saying things like, well, there's maybe some no or weak figure ground kind of thing going on here. And this feels similar to me in the sense that, the the table's like the screen, the computer screen here. Like Agnes felt like that was in some weak sense pick outable. Right.
Okay,
She didn't say I'm seeing the tablet in the kitchen. She said I'm seeing it on the table.
so can I have two comments. One is about like, so Michael, I hear what you're saying and I agree. Mostly I agree with you. If we're going to do it that way, let's stick to weak figure ground or partial figure ground in this case as well. And possibly also like in the cat case, that one where like the cat is a weak figure ground potentially. So that's one thing I want to say is I agree and I think we should do it the same. Um, However, one question that I wanted to raise was whether that is something to be like whether those words are an indication that in fact there was some sort of partial figure ground, or whether they're a product of the fact that in order to describe an experience, I have to use some sort of conventional language. And like tablet on table is the language that one uses rather than like I see table, tablet. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it otherwise, right?
So I totally agree, Agnes. That's why I was suggesting that the phrase that we used earlier is correct. Something like weak or no figure ground.
Yeah,
So maybe going back to one of Russ's themes, maybe we just can't make that distinction. And so we just
yeah,
allow it to be one or the other.
yeah.
Like maybe the words are just there because words have to be there, or maybe they're there because you were weakly making a distinction but in experience between the table and the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
So that's why I prefer the phrase "my eyeballs were aimed at," because when you start like that, it makes it seem like, well, now I can tell you where my eyeballs are aimed. They're aimed in the direction of the table with the tablet and the notepad on it or whatever, the list. But I'm not making any of those figural.
But
That's
here,
what.
okay, so here's a question though. When you, Agnes, if you were to say my eyeballs were aimed at the table, and supposing that you're speaking truly, and um, the question is, was there something in your experience in the moment that corresponded to the fact that my eyeballs were aimed at the table, or is this purely propositional knowledge on your part? I know I was in the kitchen, I know the tablet was on the table, therefore my eyes must have been aimed at the table, right? In other words, there's no experiential component to that. You're just saying that that's how my eyeballs had to have been. Or can you not distinguish between those two things?
No, I mean, okay, so first of all, this wasn't in the kitchen, it was in the office, but that doesn't matter.
Oh, never mind.
Um,
Sorry.
it's okay, it doesn't matter. In my experience, I saw the tablet on the table. Like not, it wasn't like an something I inferred or anything like that. Like that was part of my experience.
So it's more than my eyeballs are aimed at,
Exactly. Yeah, and like
but less than I see the tablet, or I see the list, or I see the table.
I was seeing the tablet on the table with the list.
That's what makes me want to say that it's more like a weak figure ground thing, but not merely as a fact of the world. My eyeballs were pointed at the
Yeah.
table.
I would agree with like I mean, I think Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that your point is more about what Russ was saying earlier about the inability to distinguish between little or no figure ground phenomenon. I think what you're saying is that is the case here, just as it is in some of the other samples. And
Yeah, I was kind
I
of
would agree with
I,
that.
I was kind of reacting to the my eyeballs were pointed at language because in the past we've used that language to describe facts of the world that aren't actually facts of our experience. And it seems to me that it was very weakly a fact of your experience that you were seeing the table. It wasn't just that in retrospect you know that your eyes must have been pointed in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, it was part of my experience.
But how strong was that being figurized? That I think that's the part that we're saying, well, little or no.
Yeah, I agree. And
So
we'll say that
we
for the
happy.
cat as well, if we can revise that one.
Anybody remember where the cat is?
I think you just scrolled past it a second ago. It's on day 7, I believe.
Yeah, it is. I'm just looking here. It's 7.3.
There it is, 7.3. So we're going to change this.
Cat.
But it's not just the cat. If we left it as cat, it would make it seem like the figure. It's cat, pavement,
Right.
porch.
I mean, I was okay with either of the languages. The thing I was reacting to was my eyeballs were pointed at language, and I was only reacting to that because we had been using that kind of phrase to be clear that we're just talking about real world facts and not
'Cause-
experiential facts. And it wasn't
right,
obvious to me that we were doing that in this case.
fair enough.
I would change this to cat, not cat pavement porch. Because I think if any, like if something was, the cat was slightly figurized, the pavement and the porch were in the background. Those were the other um, aspects of my experience that weren't figurized.
Sorry, I just killed a fly on my computer screen. So it looked like I just whacked you in the face with something that wasn't you, that was the fly.
So my recollection is that the cat was not as figurized as Agnes just made it out to be.
I mean, it wasn't. That's why I said little weak or partial or diffuse, like I want to say that it's not figurized, but maintain, I guess like to be consistent with the other ones. I don't feel like I can confidently say that this one is so different from, say, the first sample we talked about today, where I was looking at the screen and there was like a little to no partial diffuse figure ground phenomenon computer screen. I would say I'm unsure whether there was little or no figure ground phenomenon, parentheses cat, because if to the extent that there was some figure ground phenomenon, which there may not have been, and if there is, it's very weak, the figure would have been the cat. Because the only other things in my visual field, in my experience, rather, were the pavement and the porch. There was nothing else.
So the question is that what Agnes felt Agnes's experience was at the moment of the beep? And then there's Agnes's experience during the interview a week ago. And then there's Agnes's experience as she recalls it today. And we have already seen an example where the last two of those things are discrepant.
I'm willing to stand corrected, but I am I mean one thing I feel pretty confident about, and you can correct me. Like if Michael wants to fact check me what I said in the transcript, he can. But like I feel like I have a pretty distinct memory of my visual experience. And I mean, there just based on like there was nothing else behind the cat. Like there was the cat, there was the pavement, and there was the house. There was like nothing else in my visual field that I saw. Um, and I mean, I think the only like for me that is clear. Like that is just a fact. But I'm willing to be corrected about any of this. Um, the question, the thing that I'm less sure about is the extent of the figure ground phenomenon. But I feel confident that those were the only things in my visual field.
So here's your opening salvo about it.
Yeah. So that does that not match what I'm saying right now?
My way of reading this is that if we want to try to assimilate it to some extent to some of the other ones, like the list on the tablet on the table one, in that case, like the I would assimilate like house and porch to the table and cat to the list or something like that.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But in both of those cases, it seems like
Well, I would assimilate cat to list on tablet.
yeah, yeah, fair, yeah. I think that's what I was trying to say, but maybe I said it wrong. Um, and it seems to me that what we've been, or one of the things we've been saying is that in that case, it's not clear the extent to which the table was figurized with respect to something else or not. And in this case, it's not clear whether the house and porch are figurized with respect to anything else.
There was no anything else. Like just based on like the perspective of where I was sitting, like there was no any like I was low to the ground, the cat was low to the ground, and like my vision was limited here. There were no other like I don't know, other things that I could see. It was just
Mhm.
that bit of porch, the pavement, and the cat.
So I think it's
So
not exactly like the other ones then.
it's not exactly like the other ones, but nothing has to be exactly like anything else. But what I would say is most people who had more or less this kind of experience would have said as their opening salvo, I was seeing the cat. And there would be no mention of the pavement at all or of the porch. And if you asked them, if you pressed them, they would say, "Wait, the cat was sitting on the pavement, of course, and there was the porch in the background." But I wasn't really paying attention to that. My experience was on the cat. Agnes does not sound like that at all to me. Now the question is that just a verbal thing? Well, Agnes has this way of speaking, and those people have that other way of speaking, or is this an experiential thing?
I think it's I think it's an experiential thing. And I think what you're getting at, Russ, is that there wasn't much of a figure ground phenomenon. But I guess the reason I'm maybe revising that or kind of pushing back against it is just in light of the other samples that seem kind of similar. And one of the things we talked about was, I don't know, I guess I'm having a hard time with certainty drawing a clear distinction between, say, this sample and the first one we talked about today. I believe it was 7.5 or whatever, where we decided that we should call it little or no figure ground phenomenon or like weak partial, like I just, I don't know. I'm having a hard time here knowing where like the categories where things should be categorized differently or not. Um, and partly I am drawing on my memory of what what I remember the experience to have been. Um, I don't know. I don't like I don't feel confident about any of this.
So, let me draw what I take to be a hugely important distinction here, and that is that we're trying to determine the conversation that we're having for the last 5 minutes here is about trying to determine whether there's a 20% figure-ish, a 20% ish figure thing, or a 25% ish figure thing. Whether there is a slight difference between the cat and the computer screen or whatever. But in both of those, situations, it's a long way away from a clear figure ground phenomenon.
Mm.
And and to my way of thinking, the latter part of that is the important deal. The important deal is Agnes's figure ground phenomenon is experientially, not just linguistically, but experientially different from those other people who talk about their figure ground phenomenon. That she has, at best, a weak figure ground phenomenon sometimes. How weak, whether we call it 25 or 35 or whatever, doesn't much matter, but it's not 100 or 95 or 90.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And that is the big deal. And we can't lose sight of that from the fact, well, we can't, I think there are people who criticize my work and say, well, you guys can't decide between whether there's no figure ground here or just a little bit of figure ground. And I'm saying, well, that's not the important distinction. The important distinction is Agnes's figure ground phenomenon is not the same as a lot of other people's figure ground phenomenon, as best we can tell.
That's fair.
So, and that's another way of saying that the captions don't have to be exactly the same. And if we do make them exactly the same, that doesn't mean that the experience has to be exactly the same.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful actually. Yeah. So I'm happy with keeping it as it was in light of that.
So let me where did the cat go? 7.5?
7.3, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Pull down.
Does that seem fair?
I mean, so I would either revert back to our original description, which was no figure ground phenomenon, or if it's partial, then I would just put cat in parentheses. Like what I think is not the figure is the cat, pavement, and porch with some other stuff as the ground, because I think there was no other stuff. So
Got it.
I would either have just cat in parentheses, or I'm happy with just no figure ground phenomenon, which is what we had originally.
So does it?
So you're seeing the pavement and the porch and the cat, and it's maybe the cat is in some weak sense figurized relative to pavement and porch, or maybe not. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. I guess that's how ultimately how I understood it. And I was trying to assimilate it a little bit too strongly, probably, to some of the earlier experiences. Um, so there's something similar here, but maybe trying to make it fit into some model that exactly applies to all of them doesn't make sense.
We're in the weeds as far as distinctions are concerned. So we happy with this as in 7.3?
Yes.
And we haven't yet gotten to the second half of 6.2 here. But, we happy with this so far?
Yes.
And this one, I was never fully satisfied that I understood what was happening here in this second half.
So I think one of the things that came out of that discussion, which I think you said somewhere in there, yeah, it's not a, so you said it's not a sensory thing, like Agnes, because I think I pushed Agnes, like, were you feeling it in your nostrils or in your throat or whatever? And um, you did say you were feeling the breath in your nostrils, but then what else did you say? Well, so I don't know what to make of this. Let me read it out loud and see what you think, Agnes. So I asked, you're really just, this was a question, although I put it in form of a statement here. You're really just paying attention to breathing or breath rather than some physical feeling in this area. And then you said yes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You said yes and no. I was feeling the breath primarily in my nostrils. So that sounds like it was a physical feeling, but it was in your nostrils. Maybe I was pointing to some other area and you were saying, yes, I was feeling it, but not in the spot you're pointing to, Michael. I was feeling it in my nostrils. Now I'm interpreting our words now in retrospect, not really remembering what I might have been doing.
Yeah, I mean, from what I recall and kind of connecting this to Michael's description, um, one of the discussions that we had was about what was happening at the moment of the beep. And again, this whole what experience did the beep interrupt thing came up.
Right,
And I
right.
wasn't able to locate the beep. Like it's not like in breath, in breath, in breath, beep. I was breathing in. I was not able to do that so precisely. What I was able to do, I believe reasonably confidently, but that's something I don't remember at all, so don't take my word for that, was that I was somehow attending to my breath and that I was feeling it in my nostrils. I think the feeling in my nostrils didn't exhaust the experience. Like it wasn't just feeling breath in nostrils, it was something more than that. So I think part of the issue from what I remember that came up was just like how to describe this exactly, the experience of this, what was precisely happening at the moment of the beep, which I wasn't able to do.
So, right. So I won't read all this text, but in case a reference is helpful, we're talking about 3614 in the transcript. And and that I think I'm about to say what you just said, Agnes, but so tell me if you feel like I'm not. So Agnes wanted to say that in the general vicinity of the beat, she was somehow aware of the ins and the outs. So she says, in experience, the ins were distinguished from the outs, but she was not able to say, so there's some general sense in which in and out was happening, but she was not able to say at the moment of the beat whether it was an in or an out. So
Yes.
this is one of those cases where Agnes was not able to pinpoint, even though she knows that in her experience there was stuff going on, she wasn't able to pinpoint exactly where the beep happened relative to that. So similar to words where I don't know where it happened, whether it happened after this word or this word, but I know that words were going on. It feels similar to that to me. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would alter in what you said was I would say in contrast to like one of the other beeps that we talked about where I was saying blah 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 and the beep went off at this point and I'm confident.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying is,
Oh, okay, that's what you're saying.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm saying it is in distinction to that.
Oh, in distinction. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
And
We noted that when in an earlier one today,
yeah,
precisely because we thought it might be distinct from some other ones
yeah,
where you weren't able to say exactly where it happened.
yeah.
And I think the confusion, there was a long discussion of that, and I think the confusion was that you initially said I'm feeling the in and out of my breath, and then
Mhm.
we couldn't figure out whether it was an in or an out. And so at one point I offered the idea, which turned out not to pan out. I offered the idea of, well, maybe you were just experiencing the in and outness of it without distinguishing the ins and the outs. And you said, no, I was distinguishing the ins and the outs. I just don't know whether it was an in or an out at the moment of the beat.
Yeah.
I don't know how to summarize that in green text, but that seems like a relevant observation.
So what I would say about that is I don't think I understand what this experience is. It seems like it's less than a sensory thing, or more than, or different from a sensory thing.
Well, she said she's feeling it in her nostrils, though, which kind of feels sensory to me.
Yeah, I didn't believe it
I
though.
think it's a
That
subtle sensory.
Russ said he said yes, but he didn't believe it.
Well,
what I believed it was that it was more about nostrils than about chest or about abdomen or something.
Okay.
I believe that, but that doesn't mean that I felt breath in my nostrils.
I think it's a subtle sensory thing. And like, okay, like if somebody comes and like smacks me in the arm, that is not subtle, right? Like I felt pain in my arm or whatever. Feeling breath in nostrils or, like let's say you're sitting outside and you feel like a slight wind, that's more subtle, but it's still sensory. And I think that's, I mean, okay, I think this is at least partially a subtle sensory thing. I don't know that that exhausts the experience. Um, I think it's also, I think it's also like in the realm of, I mean, two separate things are coming into my mind, and I don't know which of them or perhaps neither characterizes this. So one thing is, the thing I was going to say is like maybe it's in the realm of like a pause and an awareness, like a pause and but then an awareness of what's going on in that pause, which is just breathing. The other thing that comes to my mind, but this is like highly theory laden, is just like it was like a moment of mindfulness of just like in the Buddhist context, often it's discussed as like a bare awareness. But I don't know if that's too theory laden to say. Probably it is. Um, I don't know.
So my understanding of bare awareness would be in the Buddhist sense would be if I'm inhaling, I am experiencing myself as inhaling. And if I'm exhaling, I'm experiencing myself as exhaling, which
Yeah.
is not what I understood Agnes to be saying here, that she is somehow into the cyclical nature. And so what I guess I've been thinking about as with this discussion is that it's sort of like a lack of figure ground of, but in the in the experiential sense, I'm not making the inhale the figure. I'm not making the exhale the figure, but I'm not discarding it either entirely. I'm not ignoring it.
So in that whole discussion, there was a lot of back and forth between me and Agnes about. I tried to get her to say what tell me something about the physical feeling, and she was like, "No, it's not that. No, it's not that." And then there was a long discussion from Agnes at the end of which she says, "I think I'm confabulating now." And then, but then the moment when she was like, "Yes, this is it," I said, "You were feeling something physical in this area, your nostrils, but it was just breath, not temperature or flow and in other words, I was referring back to the list of things that I might have that's more specific that she might have been feeling, the flowness of it, the temperature of it, whatever." And so it was like none of that. It was just breath felt in the nostrils. And Agnes said, exactly, yeah, yeah. That was the one time that she was like, yes, yeah, I'm looking at her response. So you have to read mine in context. I wasn't just worried about whether it's temperature or flow. It was like the whole list of things that I had offered earlier that were my attempts to try to characterize the nature of the physical feeling. And she wants to say it was just breath, but it was in her nostrils.
And Russ, I mean, what you said earlier about like notice like when the breath is moving in, you notice that it's moving out. When the breath is moving out, you notice that it's moving out. I mean, I didn't say those words, but I would have characterized it that way. I mean, I think those words characterize what I was experiencing. Again, with the big caveat that, of course, this was a long time ago and like I may be misremembering, like, I could be getting it wrong in all sorts of ways. But what the thing that Michael just pointed to, I mean, I think part of the issue here, perhaps, is I mean, the passage that Michael pointed to is like, oh, I'm feeling the breath. One way of replying to that might be, no, you're not feeling the breath. You must be feeling some movement in the hairs of your nostrils or warmth or whatever. And I said, no, I'm feeling the breath. And of course, like I'm part of why I raised the theory ladenness stuff is because I've done a good bit of meditation practice and listened to people talk about this and so forth. And of course, that informs how I'm interpreting any experience that I have. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of that, but I don't know what my point is here, except that I think that's part of the challenge here in describing, for me to describe what precisely what was going on when I say that in like a non-theory laden way. I don't think I'm able to do that. And maybe that's why you're saying, I don't know what was going on here. I don't know.
With the good news or the bad news, depending on how you look at it, is I think this is the only sample that's sort of like in this category.
Yeah.
And so from the good news point of view, I think we don't have to much worry about it. It's not going to be a characteristic of much of Agnes's experience. The bad news is that if we had more examples, then we might be able to triangulate across them and start to understand what we're doing here. But
That sounds right.
anybody else want to something in the green here?
I think I mean, again, I mean, this is all now in light of what you just said, which in my memory, at least, or relative to my memory, seems right. we did have this long discussion about was it physical or not. I think Agnes wanted to say it is physical, but there was no specific physical sensation that she was able to identify apart from breath, which I found interesting, even if it's unique relative to the list of experiences that we have. And I don't know, Russ, is maybe that's related to what you want to say about your own self there that you don't fully understand. I don't fully understand it either, but I think those words at least are a little more specific than just, I don't know what's going on here.
Okay. So we happy with this as a,
I mean, I guess
Well, I would say it's physical without a specific physical
yeah,
sensation having been specified or something like that.
agreed. And then I want to say without Michael and Russ fully understanding, because I think I understand. I don't know if I'm doing a good job convincing you that I understand, but
I
I
mean,
think
I don't know if I don't know how I feel about it. I think I could probably convince myself that I understand it, but I'm not sure that I would. Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know. I'm not sure what my stance is towards this, but I think I do like the physical without there being a specifically mentioned physical sensation or something like that. That does strike me as a good summary of that whole discussion.
I agree.
so in the spirit of the caption is trying to remind us of what we were talking about. Is this fair enough?
Yes.
Yes. Maybe attending to breathing, or is that too complicated?
Is it attending or just awareness?
I don't know.
I don't know either. And I think one of those words Russ doesn't like, so
I don't like either one of them, but
okay.
but but they're only words, and we got to do the best we can do. So shall we move on to number 6.3 here? And
Sure.
so this is seeing without figure ground.
Yes. And then I would also say anticipatory pause.
Yep.
Mhm. So it is now 9:42, which is 12:42, which is 15 minutes before we had to be done. Do we want to stop here, or do we want to see whether we can get through day 5?
Well, does it matter if I mean, we're not going to get through day 5, but does it matter? Do we have to get through a whole day or does it make
No,
sense?
it doesn't matter.
Well, then I say let's go till 1 o'clock and get what we can done.
I'm happy with
This is like grading papers, Russ. You have to get through as much of it as possible in
it.
in the time allotted. I don't mean it's like grading papers in the sense that it's drudgery.
I think I understood what you meant.
But Agnes will get a grade at the end.
You too, Michael. You especially.
Well, that's fair. If we know that we're grading each other, maybe we'll be nicer.
Maybe. Uh-oh, I'm attending to my breathing.
Yeah.
I just noticed that.
making a liar out of me in the first sentence. This seemed like a different deal from attending into my breathing, but from the previous one.
It did.
I mean, okay, if I can say something that I think Russ will disagree with, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, I would, again, from my memory, I would say that this probably bears a lot of resemblance to the attending to the breathing. Like, I mean, it's that previous beep that we were talking about, the kind of attending to the breathing that was going on there, um, is the kind of attending to breathing that you do in a meditation practice, but it was happening kind of spontaneously. And of course, again, with the big caveat that I may be misremembering or whatever. Um,
This one does feel more intentional than the other
it was
one.
more intentional. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was more intentional rather than spot. Like that's what I was trying to be doing here. As you can see with the more than 80%. Like, I mean, a lot of meditation experience, especially in the beginning when one is distracted, it is not actually doing that. So I think that was it was not as present as some meditations are, but it was that is what I was kind of trying to do.
There is, so there was a discussion here about, and maybe it's in this description. No, there was a discussion here um, about the location of the beat relative to experience, and it ended up. I'm around 8:31 right now in the transcript. It ended up that you were willing to say it might be the 80/20 might be more of a temporal something. In other words,
Right.
I'm 80% sure that it was during the attending to breathing, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was really during the swirl of thoughts about the beeper. And so I think that's relevant in part because it may be another one of these cases where you're not, well, it is another one of these cases where you're not sure where the beeper actually happened.
Mhm.
But what is similar to this one, similar between this one and the previous breathing one is again insisting that it's more about the physical nature of the breathing rather than like a cognitive thought to the effect I am breathing or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. This seem right?
Yes. Are we trying to? I mean, I guess this is not specifically a aspect of Agnes's experience, but then we've been saying maybe it connects to Agnes's experience. And by it here, I mean the lack of clarity about when the beep happened relative to experience, because this seems another case like that. So Agnes was going back and forth between this was a 100% slash 0% breathing words one way or the other, but I'm not sure which one it was. And then the other option was I was sort of 80% attending to breathing and 20% to swirl of words, but she wasn't able to like distinguish between those two things.
So what did we say originally? was one of the early.
It was the very first one, I think. No, I'm wrong.
Here it was. Well, we said this, in 7.2, she was confident about the movie.
Right. But we raised that because of anticipating that there
Right.
would be, lack of
Right.
confidence.
So now we're in sample
5.1 should be, or 5.2.
5.2. So this should be not confident about moment of the beep.
Yeah, or just lack of confidence.
Onward to number 3.
So that's like a lack of figure ground phenomenon. And then a bodily sensation awareness, or however you put it, Russ. Anticipatory pause.
Seems pretty straightforward. Are we happy about that?
Yeah.
The only thing, I don't know if this matters, but the kind of like that eager anticipation, should that be included in the pause? I feel like that's maybe distinct a little bit from the others. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a slightly stronger sense of anticipation from some of the others.
Yeah.
It's still anticipation, but yeah, you were more emphatic about that in this one than in the others.
So should we say something about seeing figure ground phenomenon here? Um,
And if we were to say that, which way would we go? No figure ground or figure ground?
I would lean towards figure ground. Like, I think the phone was figurized in this case.
So what I would say is that I must not have thought that when I wrote this description.
Okay, I could be wrong. Yeah,
Because I wrote this.
right.
If this were normal figure ground, everyday figure ground, I'd say I reach for and see the phone.
Yeah, so
Right.
here's something Agnes says. I'm not focusing on anything in particular. It's all just there in front of me.
Okay, never mind. I take back.
So it's a hugely important deal that what Agnes's retrospection doesn't match up with what she said at the time. And that's this is by no means a criticism of Agnes. It is the way it is the bane of everybody's existence, basically.
So I guess I think part of why I interpret it that way is because of the reach for the phone with the enacted but not experienced intention of unplugging it. Part of what was tripping me up and like I had a hard time. I was just kind of using the figure ground phenomenon as a starting point for our discussion is because of that other component of this first part. So I don't know. I'm not sure how to make, like what to make of that with respect to figure ground. Like if there's
So,
an enacted
so,
intention of unplugging it, it feels, I don't know. I don't know if that's right. That there
so
could be if,
I, my interpretation, I'm reading through the transcript now. I won't read through all the thing, but my interpretation is that as a visual experience, there wasn't a whole lot of figure ground, but you were definitely like cognitively focused or intentionally focused on the phones. Like that's the thing I need because I need to do something with that. You were
Mhm.
you were going to
Yeah,
answer a message or something. But
yes,
that kind of importance to you in the moment of the phone is not the same thing as visual figure ground.
yeah, yeah, good. Agreed. So should we say, I mean, okay, should we settle on no figure ground phenomenon, seeing with no figure ground?
I don't think we really carefully explored that in this one. We didn't, it wasn't you didn't make a big deal out of it, but it looks to me like we didn't really either.
Mm.
So what was the sentence that you just read? The first one?
Oh, I wasn't reading any particular sentence. I was just reading through the entire transcript
You quoted a sentence, at least as I recall it. The reaching.
where okay, I wasn't quoting, so I was just summarizing, so maybe I missummarized, but um where was I? What was I looking at? See if I can find something.
I could see the phone and I was focused on the phone on the counter.
Right. But then so again, I'm just interpreting here, but my interpretation, so the question was what's the nature of that focus? And as I was reading through this, maybe I'm misinterpreting it. It seemed to me the nature of that focus was something like this is the thing I need to do something with, but it wasn't so much a visual thing as a this is the object of interest to me in the moment because I need to answer messages or unplug it or both. I can't remember now. I think it was both. I think it was unplugging for the sake of taking it somewhere so you could answer messages.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying I don't think we in the end really explored carefully whether this was a figure ground phenomenon. It was more, but the nature of the focus didn't seem to be Agnes saying this thing stood out to me visually from this other thing. Like she used the words, I'm seeing the phone on the counter, but those same words have been used in situations where we're saying there wasn't a strong figure ground thing. And so I think we can't interpret those words themselves as meaning figure ground.
I agree.
And so the question is, what's the nature of the focus? And I guess if we had evidence that the nature of the focus on the phone was visual, then we could say, okay, well, that is the right interpretation in this case. But it seems to me there's an equally plausible, if not more plausible, interpretation of the focus is that it was the object of interest to Agnes in the moment, rather than the object that visually marked itself out from everything else. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Maybe I didn't say that very well.
So if what you're saying is that we're not going to say anything about figure ground phenomenon about this, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying is I don't think we have a conclusive thing to say one
I
way or the other.
I agree.
what we do have a conclusive thing to say is that Agnes was interested in the phone. I mean, I don't know that we need to say that, but I mean, I think that seems to be true in this case.
And I mean, we want to see something, we want to say something about the visual phenomenon.
Yeah, so you said here that in your visual, I'm at 39:53 now. You said like what was in my visual field? I was seeing phone on counter,
Mm.
right? But now what I'm saying is we never really explored whether that is describing a figure ground experience. So we did explore that when you said I'm seeing tableau on table or whatever it was. We
Okay,
we
so
we were
question.
kind of
I mean, does
go
the
ahead.
fact that we didn't explore it explicitly rule out our describing it, our mentioning figure ground at all now in this context?
I mean, my inclination would be to say I mean, similar words were used here to cases where we did explore it, so it could be interpreted the same way, but I don't think we have very strong evidence for that, apart from just saying, well, the same words were used, so maybe it's like the other one. So the same figure of speech was used here as you used when you described tablet on table or whatever they were. But we never said enough in my reading of this, we never really said enough to you weren't saying things like but nothing was standing out in particular or things like that, which is what the kind of thing
Yeah.
you were saying earlier.
Right. So hmm. Yeah, I mean, Russ, like, what's your answer to this question about whether we should say anything about figure ground or not?
I would not say anything about figure ground about this.
Okay.
And my logic there is something like if I'm going to make a claim about Agnes's figure ground phenomenon that makes her a little bit unusual, then I don't want to have to pin that on something which is pretty ambiguous.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
Yep.
so I would back away from trying to make a claim about this.
Okay.
And when I read through this passage here, my figure ground phenomena don't antennae don't jangle. That's she's reaching for the phone on the counter. That seems like a sort of a natural thing. If I'm going to pick up my phone, I'm going to see the phone in the counter. It's not just the phone. It's not just the counter. That's seems like natural action figure ground phenomenon to me.
I mean, the only slight pushback against that might be at like 4108 and 4113. Agnes says, I'd say the phone plugged in this and the counter are equally salient, which does kind of point in the direction of not making a strong figure ground kind of distinction, like the counter and the phone are kind of all just there or something. I don't think it's strong enough to change what you just said, Russ. Uh, but it, I think everything that I'm reading here is consistent with both. This is a normal figure ground kind of experience, and also this is not figure ground kind of experience. And I don't think, to my mind, I can't tell the difference between those two hypotheses.
Right. I agree. So,
Oh, I have to go.
yeah.
I just realized what time it is. I have 18 minutes to get somewhere that takes about 18 minutes to get to.
All right. So go for it. We'll email when we're going to do this again and finish.